We often talk about state surveillance in these very abstract terms. It's this big kind of nebulous idea of a government eye watching us.
Right. The all-seeing eye.
Exactly. But what happens when that eye isn't just the state? What if it's, well, what if it's a private company you pay every month for your phone service?
And that company becomes not just a collaborator, but a core part of the spying machine itself.
That is the terrifying reality we're digging into today. This isn't theoretical. We've got the documents to prove it.
We do.
Yeah.
And they give us this just incredibly granular look inside the mechanics of repression.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
This deep dive is all about what's being called the Damascus Dossier. So what is it? What makes this trove of documents such a complete game changer?
Well, a dossier is an investigation based on an absolutely massive amount of source material. We're talking about 134,000 files. And the key thing here is that these aren't secondhand accounts or, external reports. These are internal documents. They were recovered directly from Syrian intelligence services right after the fall of the Assad regime in December 2024.
So we literally have the spies' paperwork.
We have their paperwork. And the heart of it, the absolute core revelation, is this shocking level of collaboration between Syrian, one of the biggest mobile operators in the country, and the state's intelligence agencies.
So our mission for you, listening to this, is to really get into the weeds of how this worked.
Exactly. We want to extract how its supposedly private company and the state's spy agencies collaborated. Not just that they did, but how. What data did they get? How was it moved?
And what did that actually mean for ordinary Syrian people? Because this isn't just history, right? This is a lesson in how the infrastructure we all rely on can be used to just dismantle civil liberties.
And the central scoop, the main takeaway from these documents, is not subtle. It's right there in black and white. Syrian gave intelligence agencies what the files call unfettered access.
Unfettered access? That means everything.
Everything.
Huh.
Customer phone numbers, their data, and, as we'll see, even the actual content of their private conversations. It was a complete and total institutional betrayal.
To really understand how big of a deal this is, we have to start with where these documents came from. The recovery context is, it's pretty incredible.
It really is. So the German broadcaster NBR initially obtained these files, the core of the Damascus Dossier. They then shared them with a huge network of investigative journalists.
We're talking about the ICIJ, right? The International Consortium of Investigative Journalists?
Yes, them and also key regional partners like ARJ in Jordan and DRJ in Lebanon. It was a massive effort to process and understand what they had.
And you mentioned something earlier I want to circle back to. We hear about massive data leaks all the time, but they're usually digital, hacked servers. This is different. This is a lot of paper.
That's a really crucial point. In the digital age, surveillance trails can be wiped, they can be encrypted. It's often hard to prove intent.
But a signed memo.
A signed memo, an interrogation report, handwritten notes in a file. That is the bureaucratic smoking gun. It moves our understanding from, rumor and anecdotal evidence, which everyone in Syria knew was happening.
Well, people assumed they were being listened to.
They assumed it. This proves it. It shows the process, the intent, the actual mechanism of how it worked. It's what you need for any kind of future accountability.
It lets us draw an org chart of the repression. So who are the key players named in these documents?
Okay, so you have two main intelligence entities that were receiving this data from Syrian. First, there's the General Intelligence Directorate, or the GID.
And who are they?
The GID was Syria's main civilian intelligence agency. Think of them as the primary tool for internal repression. They tracked political opponents, they enforced loyalty.
So they were the end users of the intelligence. They're the ones knocking on doors.
Exactly. They received the compiled dossiers, and they used them to target people. But they weren't the ones handling the raw data feed. That was the second player.
Which was the communications director.
Right. And this is an intelligence agency, too, but it operates inside the Syrian Ministry of Defense. They were the direct technical recipient of all this raw data flowing from Syria.
So they were like the IT department for the security state?
That's a perfect way to put it. They were the technical hub. They took in this massive flood of private customer data, they processed it, stored it, and then passed the relevant bits along to the GID.
That's an interesting split. Why would the military intelligence be the one handling data from a commercial telecom company?
It really points to how the regime viewed critical infrastructure. Telecoms, power, water. These are all seen as strategic national assets.
And so they fall under the military's control.
Precisely. They had to be monitored by the most trusted, most powerful part of the regime, which was the military. The GID needed the data to do its job, but the Communications Directorate was the one trusted to build and manage the pipeline to get it.
And the timeline here is important. The documents show this wasn't some emergency measure during the war.
Not at all. It was systematic. We have evidence from a 2020 interrogation report. We have memos going all the way up to 2024, right before the regime fell. This was an ongoing, deeply ingrained practice. It was business as usual.
So we've got the players, Syriatel, the provider, the Communications Directorate, the military's tech hub, and the GID, the civilian repression arm.
A clear pipeline of data for control.
So now the big question is, why was Syriatel so compliant? And what do these documents tell us about the inner workings of the regime itself?
Well, the question of why Syriatel was so compliant really starts and ends at the top. This wasn't just some random company being pressured.
No, it was basically a family business.
It was. Syriatel's chairman at the time was Rami Makhlouf, and he is Bashar al-Assad's maternal cousin.
It doesn't get much more direct than that. It's not just a political connection, it's blood.
And this wasn't a secret. The U.S. and the EU had already sanctioned Makhlouf for exactly this reason, for aiding the Assad regime. So for a company like Syriatel, giving data to intelligence wasn't really a choice. It was just its function within the family's power structure.
Okay, and this is where it gets really interesting, because the intelligence agencies, the GID, they weren't just pointed outwards at political opponents, they were also turned inward.
Yes, on the elite themselves. One of the most critical documents in this whole dossier is a 2020 report from the GID's Branch 251.
Which has a pretty notorious reputation.
A very notorious reputation. And this report details the interrogation of 6 people, all connected to Makhlouf's business empire. And one of them was Syriatel's IT director.
So why are they interrogating the top people from the president's cousin's company? This seems like a family dispute playing out through the secret police.
That is exactly what it was. This happened during a very public, very nasty fight between Makhlouf and Assad. The official story was about tax evasion. Makhlouf allegedly owed the state a huge amount of money.
But it was clearly about more than that.
Oh, it was a power struggle.
Yeah.
It was Assad showing everyone, even his own family, that no one was untouchable.
And the fact that they used the GID for what was supposedly a tax issue, what does that tell you?
It tells you there's no separation of powers. None. The state's tools of coercion are just the personal tools of the ruler. If Assad wants to put pressure on his cousin, he doesn't send an auditor. He sends his most feared intelligence agency.
It's the ultimate sign you've fallen out of favor.
Absolutely. The GID was the regime's hammer, and everything looked like a nail. They were used to settle political scores, economic scores, family scores, whatever was needed.
So during this interrogation about Makhlouf's finances and his various shell companies, they ended up documenting something else entirely, almost by accident.
That's the incredible irony here. The GID is investigating Makhlouf to seize his assets, and in the process of questioning his IT director, they formally document the very system his company uses to feed data to another intelligence agency, the military's Communications Directorate.
So the regime's infighting literally created the paper trail that exposed its own surveillance machine.
Precisely. The political drama gave us the blueprint. The interrogation transcripts of that IT director became the proof of how the digital lives of millions of Syrians were being handed over.
Okay, let's get into those mechanics. We've moved past the political drama. How did this actually work? How do you transfer the data of millions of people on an ongoing basis?
So this is where that 2020 interrogation of the IT director becomes so critical, because he laid it all out. It's a direct technical confession.
And the process he described was comprehensive.
Devastatingly comprehensive. He confirmed that Syriatel's IT department gave the Communications Directorate, the military branch, and I'm quoting here, all information related to subscribers and their communications.
Let's just pause on that phrase, all information. That's not just metadata.
No, that's who you are, where you are, who you talk to, and what you're saying. And this wasn't happening on a case-by-case basis like with a warrant.
So how did they manage the sheer volume?
The director testified that his department would upload the files directly into, quote, a database belonging to the Communications Directorate.
Okay, so that suggests a dedicated pipeline, a permanent connection between the company and the spy agency.
It does. I mean, let's use an analogy here to make this really clear. This is not the police showing up with a warrant and asking for a specific file.
Right.
This is the phone company building a permanent, mirrored copy of its own servers inside the intelligence agency's headquarters and keeping it updated in real time.
They just gave him a live duplicate of everything.
Exactly. And it gets worse. He also confirmed that Syriatel handed over a complete physical backup copy of its entire databases.
A backup copy.
A full backup. And the reason he gave was explicit, given their importance to the directorate.
That feels even more significant than the live feed. Why is giving them a static backup copy so much more alarming?
Because a backup copy is permanent and independent. The intelligence agencies now have a historical record that can't be changed or deleted. Whatever the company does tomorrow, whatever legal changes happen, even if the regime falls,
Yeah.
they still have that archive?
That data is now a permanent part of the state security files. It's weaponized history.
Precisely. And the people who made this happen were just employees, IT guys.
Yeah.
The system needed their compliance.
Which brings us to the testimony of Nidal Zarifa, a former Syriatel employee. He kind of sheds light on the human side of this.
He does, and he's very blunt about it. He told reporters it was not a matter of choice. He confirmed the information was just available to the state in a detailed and obvious way. It wasn't some secret backroom deal. It was just part of the job.
So was it just pure coercion? Or was there something else going on?
This is where it gets really complex psychologically. He said that a lot of the staff rationalized it. They felt they were serving the nation.
Serving the nation.
Yes. The belief was that this massive communications network they had built, it must remain for the country. So they could tell themselves they weren't serving Assad's repression.
They were serving this abstract idea of the country. It's a kind of cognitive dissonance. They separated the technology, which they were proud of, from the way it was being used.
It's the classic mechanism of complicity in these kinds of states.
Yeah.
You tell yourself you're a patriot, you're keeping the lights on, keeping the phones working. It's a way to normalize your role in building the infrastructure of repression.
So whether it was fear or this twisted sense of duty, the result was the same. The data flowed freely.
Unfettered, right into the hands of military and civilian intelligence.
Which brings us to the next critical question. Now that we know how the data was moved, what exactly were they looking at?
This is where it gets even more intrusive. Sharing metadata, who called whom and when, is already a huge privacy violation. But the documents from 2024 show it went much, much further.
They were getting the actual content.
Yes. The internal memos between the Communications Directorate and the GID are explicit. They confirm the military branch was sharing info on Syriatel customers' numbers as well as the content of their calls.
Wholesale eavesdropping.
And we have the direct quote from one of these memos. It's the bureaucratic language of surveillance, and it's just chilling.
What does it say?
It says, attached are available text messages, plus the data and ownership of the mobile numbers that communicated with the two mobile numbers within the required period. Please review.
Available text messages. So not just metadata, the actual words people were typing to each other.
The actual words, the substance of private conversations. This is the difference between knowing two people talked and knowing exactly what they said. And they were combining this with incredibly detailed personal information.
The PII.
The PII. The documents show they were building these incredibly rich, detailed dossiers on people. One 2024 list that went from military intelligence to the GID detailed 26 mobile phone users.
And what kind of information was on that list?
It was a complete identity blueprint. Their full name, their parents' names, which is a key identifier in Syria, their year of birth, their home address, and their government ID number.
So you combine that complete personal profile with the content of their text messages, and you have total power over that person.
Total informational power. You know who they are, where they live, who they talk to, and what they think. And it probably wasn't just Syriatel.
What do you mean?
Well, what's really troubling is that some of the memos reference data provided by both companies.
Both companies. So there was at least one other telecom operator in on this.
It strongly implies that, which means this wasn't just a unique problem because of the Assad-Maklouf family connection. This was likely an industry-wide practice.
Which means for years, pretty much any Syrian with a mobile phone was living under the assumption that their entire digital life was an open book to the military.
That's the implication. This wasn't targeted wiretapping of a few suspects. This was wholesale surveillance. They weren't looking for a needle in a haystack. They were collecting and cataloging the entire haystack.
Creating a permanent digital shadow for every citizen, just waiting to be reviewed.
It is the very definition of an infrastructure of fear.
All these technical details, the memos, the data points, they can feel a bit abstract. But this had a very real, very human cost. And the dossier gives us a face to put to the data. The case of Fouad Adel Abu Hamdan.
Yes, Abu Hamdan was a political activist in Suwaida, and his Syriatel phone number was explicitly named in one of those intelligence memos. He's one of the names on the list.
And what was the result for him knowing he was being watched so closely?
He told reporters it completely changed his life. He essentially became a prisoner in his own town. He lived in this constant, paralyzing fear of being grabbed and disappeared.
Grabbed and disappeared. That is such a specific and terrifying phrase.
It's the reality of that kind of repression. He had a quote that it gets to the heart of the psychological toll.
What did he say?
He said, "They surveilled us, all our movements. Anyone who said his opinion on Bashar al-Assad was considered wanted." He said they expected that if they just went into the city, an intelligence officer could just grab them, they'd never come home.
Just the simple act of going to the market becomes a life or death calculation.
Yes, because you know the state knows where you are at all times thanks to your phone. And this wasn't just him being paranoid. This fear was woven into the fabric of society.
And we know that from another source, right? Ahmed Abazide.
Right. Abazide is an activist with the Syrian Memory Institution. And after the regime fell, he saw the paperwork firsthand. He found the physical output of all this digital surveillance.
What did he find?
In a military security office in Soweto, he found handwritten transcripts of citizens' phone calls, both mobile and landline.
Handwritten. So let's trace that. The digital data flows from Syrian to the military's database. An analyst there listens to a call or reads a text and then physically writes it down on paper.
Exactly. The digital surveillance becomes a physical weapon in a dossier. That's the moment it gets used against a person in an interrogation room.
It's this bizarre mix of high-tech data sharing and old-school manual spycraft.
It is. And Abazide confirmed that this knowledge, the fact that your phone was a listening device for the state, it had a massive social impact.
It created a culture of self-censorship.
Precisely. He said there was a reluctance to discuss political matters on the line. The regime didn't need to listen to every single call. The possibility that they could was enough to silence people. It makes the entire population police itself.
And this all goes back to the core motivation of the regime. Nadal Zarifa, the former Syrian employee, he really summed it up.
He did. He said Assad's regime was always terrified of not knowing something.
The fear of an informational blind spot.
That's the political driver behind the technical need for unfettered access. Total information control equals total regime security. The goal was to stop dissent before it could even start.
And a company like Syrian was the key that unlocked that control.
So now, after the fall of the regime, the big question is what happens to this massive surveillance machine that was built? The technology doesn't just vanish overnight.
What's the official line from the new government that took over? Are they still doing this?
Well, the new Ministry of Communications and Information Technology says it's over. They made a public commitment to end the systematic, unfettered data sharing.
And what are the new rules, at least on paper?
A ministry spokesperson said that any access to citizen data now requires legal authorization and specific time-bound court orders and under the supervision of the relevant authorities.
So they're moving from a system of total access to one based on judicial oversight, case by case.
That's the promise. But this brings up a huge question for us and for you listening. It's one thing to write a new policy. It's another thing entirely to change the reality on the ground.
Especially when the entire infrastructure, the hardware, the software, the people, is all designed for total collection.
It's an enormous challenge. You have security agencies like the GID and the Communications Directorate, where the institutional culture for decades has been one of total access. Their entire way of operating is based on this idea.
And as you said before, they have the backup copies. The historical data is already in their possession.
It is. So to actually implement a rule of law system, you don't just need a new law. You need a complete cultural and technological reset. You have to decouple the security state from the telecom companies.
Which brings us back to corporate accountability. The dossier really shows you can't have a modern surveillance state like this without corporate complicity.
You can't. Syrian built and maintained the system. And when the head of the company is the ruler's cousin, the line between corporate profit and state security just built, it evaporates.
The company becomes another arm of the regime.
And the lesson for any country in transition is that you have to rebuild that digital trust from zero. You have to change the laws, but you also have to fundamentally restructure the institutions, both state and corporate, that enabled the repression in the first place.
It seems almost impossible to put that genie back in the bottle.
So to sum this all up, this deep dive into the Damascus Dossier has really given us an unprecedented look at how a modern surveillance state actually functions.
And the core takeaway is just how complete the co-opting of private infrastructure was. Syrian and likely other companies weren't just partners. Their customer data was a strategic asset for the regime.
And it wasn't just metadata. The proof that they were taking call content, text messages, and combining it with that deep personal information, it just confirms what Syrians feared for years, that every phone call was a potential risk.
Which brings us to our final and maybe most challenging thought to leave with you. We know the physical regime has fallen, but as we discussed, the data remains.
Specifically, those permanent static backup copies of subscriber information and communication history. That data now lives forever in the intelligence agency's files.
That information doesn't just go away. This ghost data, this perfect digital record of a decade of repression, is still there. It's still in the system.
So the question is, what future risks does that pose? Especially in a country trying to transition to something new. How can you truly build a free society and establish civil liberties when the state security apparatus still holds the complete digital history of who talked to who said what, and who associated with whom for the last 10 years?
A profound challenge, and one that will define the future not just for Syria, but for any nation trying to emerge from the shadow of a digital dictatorship. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the Damascus Dossier.